There is no perfection this side of heaven. And if you want to judge everybody according to some sort of utopia which has never existed, well then yes, that's a very easy standard by which to give yourself some degree of, elevated sense of superiority. But the idea that a country was founded on that moral premise is incredible. And the idea that we have fought hard to try to live up to it, sometimes failing drastically, that is noteworthy.
Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show. It's a great year to be alive in the United States because it's always a great year to be alive in the United States. And it is a great episode to be watching or listening because we have one of the great patriots in the United States sitting in the studio with me. He is in the Virginia Assembly, State Delegate Nick Freitas. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's quite the introduction.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone in Richmond probably introduces you that way, right?
No. I definitely have some colleagues on the other side of the aisle that would have used different word choices.
Man, there's no doubt. That just means you're over the target, right?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about state policy. We'll talk about federalism. We'll talk about a lot of things, and perhaps even including your recent trip to Israel. Mm-hmm. But the thing I want to start with is your story. You served this country as a member of the Virginia Assembly. You've also served as a member of the Armed Forces. You're a Green Beret. And so let's start with your story. You were a Green Beret. You're now in a state legislature. Mm-hmm. Every state legislature is vital. Mm-hmm. But from this third-time Virginia resident, thank you. Virginia is particularly important right now because I think as Virginia goes, the country sort of goes. Tell us how you got there.
Well, so I enlisted in the military right out of high school. Also married my wife, Tina, shortly after that. And so we got married in 19 and 20, went straight into the 82nd Airborne. And I thought I was going to get out after a while. It was a peacetime army at the time. Clinton had been in charge for part of my service. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And then we re-enlisted one more time. 9/11 happened. So I volunteered for Army Special Forces, did a couple of tours over in Iraq, and was planning to get out at 11 years. And I remember I had a sergeant major who I really respected, came at me and goes, Nick, what are you doing getting out at 11? Nobody gets out at 11 years, right? You're
kind of a weird number.
Yeah, you're halfway through it. And I just got back from my second tour in Iraq. And I remember thinking, here we are, we're Army Green Berets, we're special forces. We're supposed to be trusted to do our jobs. The bureaucracy was insane. This is 2008. The bureaucracy to get outside the wire and do our jobs was absolutely insane. And I remember telling Jerry, I was like, look, you can ask me to keep going to war and my family will support it. They will support it. They believe in what we're trying to do. You don't get to ask us to go over there and lose. You don't get to ask us to go over there and not be allowed to win. And he goes, Nick, that's garbage. If you want to fix the problem, you stay and you get more rank and you fix the problem. I said, well, that's great, Jerry. You're a sergeant major. How many problems have you been able to fix? And SF is kind of a different environment. There's a little bit more blunt communication.
You could clearly be candid, right?
Yeah, more blunt communication. And he was definitely the sort of guy that could handle it. And he said, Nick, that's a good point. I said, yeah, Jerry, the real problem is we got a bunch of people in suits that have no idea what it is to fight, have no idea what it is to live at the business end of foreign policy. And they're the ones making decisions. And so I think we need to influence them. And that's what got me to essentially leave the military at that point. Still did some work in the defense side of it, but started getting more and more focused in politics with the idea that I would one day end up maybe advising on policy and specifically foreign policy and counterterrorism. And instead, I had a friend of mine tell me that they thought I should run for office. And despite convincing me, we're still friends. and so
that was my follow-up.
Yeah. So I've been in the Virginia General Assembly now for, this session this year was my 9th session. So almost a decade now.
It's got to be hard to believe.
It is. It feel like it just flew by.
So how big a difference is it politically in terms of policy? Serving in the Virginia General Assembly with Glenn Youngkin as governor versus, say, his predecessor. Was that a polite way of putting it?
Yeah, night and day, which is crazy because initially, if you would have asked any Republican in Virginia, hey, if you had to have a Democrat as governor, if you had to, who would you have picked? And we probably would have, Ralph Northam seems like a pretty reasonable guy. Well, it turns out he didn't govern that way. And everybody can speculate on, obviously the impact of what he did and what was revealed in his yearbook. But I honestly think it's bigger than that. I see the entire Democratic Party is having moved so far to the left that I barely recognize it from when I first went to the General Assembly 9 years ago. And that's not to say that there aren't still some good, honest people that I can disagree with civilly, but still work together on things that we agree. But the number of those people is shrinking significantly. And some of the ideological language that is coming out of the left, and where I see the energy in the Democratic Party, is completely different. So it was nice to finally have a Republican governor that I could sit down and discuss things with, and that we could strategize with, but who also really worked hard to try to find common ground. It's gotten very, very difficult as the philosophy within the two parties, I think, has changed quite a bit. So
what do you think the near term is for Virginia politics, and in particular, this very dynamic you're talking about in the General Assembly as we sit here? And we're going to talk about many other things, but I'm just very, very curious, because you're not just a vital member of the General Assembly. You don't represent just any old district. You represent James Madison's legislative district.
It's quite a bit of prresure, right?
Yeah. Every time I drive through your district, which is one of the most beautiful places, not just in Virginia, but in the country, I think, man, he's got a lot of pressure on him.
Oh,
but
gosh, yeah.
Where I was going with that question was, we've got a gubernatorial race in Virginia. And not just because of the proximity to D.C., but because Virginia has been very much a bellwether state, politically, policy-wise, even culturally and economically for the country. Do you see some glimmers of optimism based on the tenure that Governor Youngkin has had?
I do. I think Governor Youngkin was able to come in and make some inroads that desperately needed to be made. Virginia is interesting. I mean, obviously, when you look at the history of the country, Virginia played an incredibly important role throughout our nation's history, but especially at our founding. And on laying the groundwork. I mean, you list off the names of the founding fathers: James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, George Washington, Patrick Henry. These are all Virginians. The issue that we have right now is, I would say that during the global war on terror, for which I think the United States made some good decisions and we made a lot of bad ones as well, one of the bad things I think happened was we massively expanded federal bureaucracy. And so I think we have some people that live in Virginia because they desperately love the Commonwealth and they love its history and its geography and its people. And I think we have a lot of other people that are here simply because of proximity to DC. And that impacts what our representation looks like in Virginia. And that's why you saw a significant change in the way Virginia has been represented over the last 10 years. And having said that, though, I do have hope that I think a lot of people are waking up to what many of people, to include Heritage, was warning people about, and that is, this is not the Democratic Party that you think it is. That this is one where you see the ideological capture that has been taking place in the Democratic Party, whether it's critical theory or whether it's this entire oppressor-oppressed dynamic. You're increasingly seeing a political party which doesn't have a great deal of respect for the founding of this country, doesn't have a great deal of respect with what we would refer to as kind of these traditional dedication to things like individual liberty, personal responsibility, property rights, free markets. And that has manifested itself not just in higher education, not just in politics, but increasingly in our schools going all the way down to elementary school. And I think people are being impacted by it in a way that they haven't before. And I think more people are waking up. And that's why I do have hope, not just for Virginia, but for much of the country.
And it seems as if they're waking up, not just in the political sphere, thank goodness, and not just in the policy sphere, thank goodness. We lose some policy fights there, but I think we're winning enough to at least have some hopefulness that we might be turning the corner on DEI and some of these other related issues. But I think the real key thing for the long term, tell me what you think, is that common sense Virginians and Americans are waking up to this other reality, which is that the left has co-opted almost all of our institutions, the military, public service generally. I'm thinking particularly about K-12 schools and universities. I think about when I was at Virginia Tech a long time ago, it was already bad in terms of some of the cultural nonsense inside the liberal arts faculty. It was even worse, I should say, at the University of Texas, but it's only gotten worse at a place like Virginia Tech, which, just to use that as an example, ought to be an otherwise conservative institution, right? Or at least common sense.
Yeah.
You should be in the School of Engineering there and not have to worry about DEI. All that to say, it seems as if people are saying, we're now have gotten wise to what the left has been doing too. They're running roughshod over us politically in terms of policy, but also taking over our institutions. What advice do you have to someone in your district, another Virginian, another American, about what they should do to help take back their schools?
So I don't think, I think we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that in many respects, our public schools are operating exactly how you would expect something operated under a state monopoly.
Well said.
And so if you truly understand that, then you realize that it's not as simple as simply getting better school board members or a better governor or a better legislature. It's about understanding what truly is the purpose of education within a free society. I don't know a single person that doesn't think that education, starting from early ages and really expanding throughout your entire life, is incredibly important. I don't think anybody disputes the fact that there's a certain degree of structure that's important for that. I don't think anybody disputes the fact that we want people to be able to have access to a quality education regardless of their economic status. Does that mean the government's the most suited entity within society to run it? I don't think so. And to say that now makes you, it's like, how could you possibly say that? Well, because once again, I have a healthy skepticism of expanding government power, especially when government power is now controlling the way my children look, not only at, the math or sciences or literacy, right? If that was it, maybe we'd be fine. But no, they want to diametrically oppose my worldview, and they want to compete with me in the raising of my children. I'm not going to accept that. And I think parents are going to have to come to the conclusion that, yes, by all means, fight for your local schools. Sure. It's going to take a long time because we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get away from it overnight. And in the meantime, your kids may very well be exposed to a number of ideas that you find completely antithetical to what you believe and the values that you hold. How much time do you want to spend? How much time do you want your kids to spend in that environment? And so I think we need parents to not just simply see attending a school board meeting as fighting for education. We need parents to see their responsibility in educating their children, and to also recognize the incredible amount of resources that exist now that did not just 10 or 15 years ago. Because more people are coming to this conclusion, and they not only want what's best for their children, they also want to provide a mechanism for other people to be able to utilize those resources as well. But I think it's critical. I also think we need to seriously look at the fact that between federal and state funding, we spend $1 trillion a year on higher education. And there's nothing more infuriating for me. And I used to be the chair of the subcommittee on higher education in Virginia. And you're looking at this going, wait a second, UVA, you're sitting on a $15 billion endowment. And you're also simultaneously lobbying for the federal government to, quote, forgive student loan debt, which means transfer it on to taxpayers who didn't take out the loan. And now you're coming here asking for hundreds of millions of more tax dollars. If you are doing such a good job, if you are just so vital to to the economic and intellectual security of America, why can't you convince people to pay tuition? Why do you have to come to me and ask me to steal it from my constituents in order to give it to you? And I think people need to understand that there is a reason why so many politicians love giving your money to institutions of higher education. And it's not because they're creating a bunch of economically viable critical thinkers. It's because they're creating activists. And until we get a handle on that, until we realize that we should not be forced to subsidize some of these institutions which seem to deliberately argue and fight against the things we love, then we're going to continue to have problems.
Yeah, there's got to be a huge comeuppance for especially schools like the University of Virginia. They're not alone in the category, unfortunately, but they often are a perfect icon for that. University of Texas, I would say that as well.
Well, and you can look at any one of these institutions and appreciate much of what they do. And you can appreciate the importance of an institution that is dedicated to higher education. And higher education is a noble goal. That doesn't mean everyone engaged in it is noble. And I think it's time for us to recognize that.
Well, and it's this whole conversation thread we're having about education reminds me there has to be so much disruption at the macro level. Mm-hmm. By that, I mean at the policy level from state legislatures or Congress, hopefully not just a future, but an imminent conservative presidential administration. On that point, I can tell you, and it will not surprise you because you represent normal people. You yourself are normal. That the most popular thing for Heritage to say around the country, do all these events, is we want to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education. And as I tell people in typical Heritage fashion, you've been a longtime friend of the institution. We're not just saying that because it's a popular line to say we don't operate that way. We're saying it, A, because we believe it, but also B, we have the plan. Yeah. But to the point about disruption from the macro level, people get it. But what I love about your exhortation is it's not enough for us to be passive and say, well, we need our state delegate to handle that, or we need our congressman or our senator or the next president to handle it. We as parents have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, we're as a family entering this coming year, our 12th year of homeschooling.
Yeah.
And people will often, you know, like 5 years ago, they would say, man, they must be kind of weird. And maybe we are, but my wife would say, what's weird is sending your kids to whether a government-funded school or a private school that is indoctrinating them, that's teaching them to hate this country. That's weird. And it's really important we flip that back on people who frankly are being, at best, too passive about all of this.
I couldn't agree more. We've also homeschooled our kids. We have a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 16-year-old. So we're almost through it.
We're on the same plan, very similar ages.
But the other thing, it's not just that I'm fighting against the federal mismanagement of education dollars, because that's what the Department of Education is. It's federal. And most people have no idea. They think that the Department of Education was something that came around during the founding. And how do we ever educate people? No, it came out in 1979 under Carter.
Which says it all, right?
Yeah, right. But I also look at it as I'm not just opposing what I think is a bad or inefficient system. I'm incredibly excited about a marketplace of ideas for education. I love the fact that my children don't see education as a government building that they go to. They see education as about learning and developing new capabilities and becoming more formidable, whether it be intellectually or economically or emotionally. And so their view of education is very, very different. And it's something that they actually enjoy as opposed to something that they dread. And so I get very excited about, look, let's not have a one-size-fits-all mass-produced form of education. Let's actually have a system which caters toward individual needs, wants, and desires. And you're not going to get that through a top-down government-run approach. So I think and this is something that Heritage has done so well on. It's not just about, here's what's wrong with what we currently have. It's like, do you understand the incredible benefits socially and economically to actually open this up to a marketplace of ideas? Not to mention the fact that one of the biggest blessings that we've experienced through homeschooling is not just that we feel like our kids are very confident in what they believe and able to articulate it and able to easily socialize and converse with people older, the same age or younger than them. But it's the relationship that we have with our kids because we essentially bought back all of that time that would have been lost to us forever. And so I can't say what a huge blessing it has been to not only raise kids that I feel are going to be capable of taking care of themselves and navigating a complex world, but kids that I now have the blessing and opportunity to be friends with.
No, it's vital. I mean, those are years we'll never get back. Yeah. And I often tell people, colleagues here at Heritage, elected official friends, when they ask, Kevin, you know, what's your favorite part of having homeschooled your kids? It's the informal time. You know, what you just described, but also the time that it's learning, it's educational, it's their own initiative to read a book, decide they want to learn a language and have the freedom to do that. And I often tell people, I think I can say that, first of all, any of us can say that as a parent. We have the right to say that. These are our own children. They're not wards of the state. But I also remind them, I said, I think I can do that because I am an educator. And I can tell you, having started a K through 12 school, that there's a lot of wasted time in a school day. It's just the nature, even with the best of intentions, it's just the nature of moving a large group of people from point A to point B. And when you consider that some of these people might be really young, like kindergartners, or as I remind my son, it's boys, we don't want to listen, right? It's very difficult, but there's a lot of lost time in the span of a school day that you get back whenever you're homeschooling.
When I talk to some of my friends or acquaintances that are a little bit more on the left, and you know, it's interesting when it comes to choosing food or other products that they buy in the marketplace. What do they want? They want something locally sourced. They want something that's from a cottage industry. They want something that's been individually tailored to their needs. But then when it's education, nope, let's just hand it over to a mass-produced government system.
It is a dichotomy, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's Well, and to your point before, let's say you have this mass-produced system run by people with the purest of intentions that you love and that you respect and that you think are really trying to do a great job. You're still going to get a mass-produced product. It is the nature of the system. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And if you don't like that, well, then you're going to have to look for alternatives.
And another reason to do this at the micro level or at the macro level is because the radical left has been so good at taking over our culture. And you combat this full scale. But I think the part of your combating that I like the most is your full-throated advocacy of masculinity properly understood. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think a large part of somebody was asking me about, politics and culture and because a lot of the people that follow me on social media, we've crossed all of our platforms. We've probably got about 3 million. A lot of them have no idea I'm an elected official. And I consider that a huge compliment.
I hear that a lot about you, actually.
I consider that a huge compliment. But one of the reasons why I talk about that is I think our country is in the condition that it's in is because families are in the condition they're in. And that's not a cliche. I honestly believe it. And I think a big part of that role, and one of the things that I try to tell young men especially, because I do believe that young men largely feel as if they're being isolated because, of course, they're the source of all the problems, right? They're the pinnacle of the oppressor pyramid. And if only men would go away or just not be men, everything would be better. Well, if that were true, we're living at the height of a culture right now that has actually embraced a lot of those ideas, and nobody seems to be happy about it, to include liberal women, right? They're not happy with it. And there's a reason for that. It's because genuine masculinity is properly understood, which is, I'll put it this way. The simplest form is when you hear the words, be a man, every man intuitively know what that means. It means you need to overcome difficulty, fear, and discomfort in order to keep your word and do your job. There is something incredibly honorable about that. Now, can there be negative manifestations of masculinity? Of course, just like there can be negative manifestations of femininity. But for men to once again embrace that role, and one of the things I tell men all the time, which sometimes we don't like to hear because it is frustrating to insist on being masculine, on being chivalrous, on being honorable and conducting yourself the way when it's not rewarded by society. There's a part of you that when it's not rewarded by society, you want to look at society and say, fine, you don't want it? Here, enjoy life without it and see how long you last. The bottom line is we need more men that are willing to step up and be proper husbands, proper fathers. They're supposed to be the men that keep the barbarians outside the gates. And unfortunately right now we're living in a society where because men have not embraced that role, in large part because they've been raised not to, we see the situation that we're in. But I honestly believe we're one generation away from fixing it. But that's going to be one generation of educating our children differently. It's going to be one generation from getting men to properly recognize their role within society and to embrace it. That if we want femininity to be able to flourish, and I do, I say this to young women all the time, it's not your job to make us good men, but you would be shocked at how important you are to the process. I truly believe that. And so that's why I put so much emphasis on it, because I think we actually play the left's game when we convince ourselves that we're one election cycle away from fixing it. No, we're not. We're one generation of strong families, which include both strong men and strong women. That's what's one generation away from fixing it.
Man, I can't underscore that enough. And people, of course, turn to heritage, and it's a great privilege. It's a duty that we have. It's not a burden to come up with a plan for what happens if such and such happens in XYZ election cycle. We will always do that. Yeah. But as I have started saying in the last year, while there is a lot that rides on every election cycle, you of all people would agree with that, there's something far more important. Mm-hmm. And it's the decisions we're making as men and women, if we're married as families, if we're not married, hopefully soon to be in families as we encourage our heritage colleagues here, but to really lean into the institutions of civil society that put government in its proper place. Yes, we have this wonderful theory and practice and custom of federalism. Yes, we have still, in spite of radical left challenges to it, the rule of law. But the reason we have those things, generation after generation in this great country, is because up until recently, almost all of our institutions have been healthy. family. But the most important institution, just to preach to the choir here for 10 more seconds, is the family. What advice do you give to people, whether they've been, married for 25 years, or maybe they're just out of college thinking about it, regarding the family?
Well, I think it's funny that that's become the countercultural way to rebel, right?
It's great.
Is to get married young and be happy. Right?
It's not the 1960s anymore, is it?
Yeah. What I would tell people is I think the cornerstone of a strong relationship has to be shared values. And it is difficult to determine whether or not someone has genuinely shared values if you're not actually taking the time to get to know somebody spiritually, emotionally, intellectually before you jump into the physical. And it's people like, why are you emphasizing that? I'm like, because I believe it. One of the things that we did with all of our kids is that we really emphasized that, like, look, the whole purpose of dating is not to experiment with other people's feeling and to have them experiment with yours. It's certainly not to experiment with other people's bodies and have them experiment with yours, because that's going to cause damage. It's going to cause you to look at a relationship in a way that is going to be detrimental both for you and for them. So have respect for yourself and have respect for other people. And if you look at a relationship, if this is going to be something that I build with another person where we're going to have kids, I tell people, I've been in the military. I've lived all over the country. I've moved several times. People ask me, where's your home? It's wherever my wife is.
Amen.
It is wherever my wife is. And if you want that kind of a relationship, it requires certain things from you. And part of that is developing yourself spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, physically, professionally, as a man, to be able to provide the sort of things that are going to attract someone to want to spend their entire life with you. And so I really want to emphasize that. I mean, for my wife and I, our foundation and our faith was absolutely critical for our marriage, our shared values, different ideas of what you're going to do and where you want to go. And that's going to change. We've been through combat tours. We've been through almost losing a child. We've been through multiple moves. We've been through so many things together. And never once did I doubt that she was going to leave me in the midst of it. Never once did she doubt that I was going to leave her in the midst of it, because we made this commitment before, not just before the state, but before God, that no, it's you and I to the end. And so I would tell people, if you want to have that kind of relationship, you have to create the right habits and practices beforehand. But it is so worth it. Out of all the things that we talk about economically for delayed gratification, right? It is so much even more valuable within your relationship. Because once you have that trust, everything in your life gets better, because you have someone that's going to be there with you. And then when you have kids and they get to witness that, that's one of the most important things I tell married couples is your kids are learning. They're gathering most of their expectations for what a marriage looks like by watching mom and dad interact. And so I would just encourage people, really, really focus on that idea of what is the foundation of your worldview? What values do you share with that other person? And then just recognize that once you start having kids, they're watching. And if what they see is something that they want, then the instructions that you give them is something they'll take to heart.
What a wonderful witness to a lot of things, including the natural complementarity of masculinity and femininity. Okay. One of the things that I've learned over the years in a school setting, but even here, which is natural, these were Catholic schools that I led, so sort of a natural part of what we were doing. But even here at Heritage, which is non-sectarian, although very animated by everyone's faith, as you know, is that because most of my colleagues are in their 20s and 30s, not all of them married, but all trying to figure out their role in society, not just politically and professionally, but they would tell you, most importantly, the role they're going to play as an individual is they're working through the ravages of a generation or two where there have not been sufficient number of witnesses to what you just said. That's a long lead up to what I intend to I offer as a piece of advice. Because one of the things we try to do in this show with cultural conversations, political conversations, is give our audience a sense of, homework assignments, action items, that if someone's been married for a long time, be a mentor couple for a young couple. But conversely, if you're dating seriously or just married, go seek out that mentorship, right? Yes. This is what makes your job as a state delegate even easier if those kinds of things are happening, right? Oh,
absolutely. No, I think it's interesting. We Tina is my co-host on our podcast, one of my co-hosts, and we've had a lot of people reach out to us directly and say, hey, could you talk to us about, we're going through a difficult time in our marriage, or we're thinking of getting married, and could we just, and it was fascinating because there's no stage in your life when you wake up and you realize that, people are looking to you for guidance now, right? Because it's
not a natural thought.
You still remember all the dumb things you did when you were, younger, and things you wish you would have done differently and whatnot. But I do think it's really important that again, we recognize this in business, when someone has been successful, there's an obligation to mentor other people that want to go down a similar path in order to help them be even better than what you were. I get this a lot sometimes, where parents will ask us about the rules that we've had for our kids, or the guidelines that we've had for our kids. I'm like, was that the rule when you were growing up? No. Well, don't you think that's hypocritical? First of all, no. Second of all, I don't care. My job is not to ensure that my kids make all the same mistakes I do. My job is to better help them navigate it. And one statement I use, because I don't protect my kids from everything, I say I protect them from scars, not bruises. Right? So something that's going to do permanent damage, yes, I'm going to do everything I can to help them avoid that and explain why, so that they understand why they need to avoid it. But yeah, sometimes people got to go out there, try, fall down, get hurt a little bit, then get back up and try again. But I do think it's important that as time goes on and you've had these experiences, good and bad, that's the other important part. I will never sit here and tell people, oh gosh, well, yeah, we just did it. It's just these 5 steps. Like, no,
it's not that simple.
No, these are 5 things that we found that have been really, really helpful. And one of the ways I know they're helpful is for the times I didn't do it that way and felt a lot of pain as a result. So I think being genuine with people about both your successes and your failures, and genuinely caring about their success, wanting people to get it right, because you know the beauty in it when you do get it right. And when people know that you genuinely want that because you believe it's true, and you're willing to not only live it out, but you're also willing to be honest about your own failings, I think is an important part of mentorship.
And this is something that transcends at least ideology. I'm thinking about Tim Carney's great work over many years in his book, Alienated America. Tim is not at Heritage. He's at another policy group, but as he says, he's the most heritage-y, non-heritage guy there is. And he's become a good friend on actually all of these topics. He's been on the show a couple of times. But where I was going with that is there are, he uses this research on social capital. And he analyzes these zip codes, a couple of which are in Virginia, couple of which in Maryland, but the ones in Maryland are politically left. Mm-hmm. But these are people who go to church. Mm-hmm. They're, whatever the church may be, they're married, they're raising their kids with rules. Yep. They may have yard signs of very different political candidates, yeah, which is interesting to you and me. Yeah. But the point is that there's an opportunity here to kind of swerve into politics and policy to speak to a very broad audience of Americans in a way that might also help us get past some sometimes toxic political discourse.
Yeah, I think shared values and shared meaning is really important. It was interesting. We just got back from a trip over to Israel, and left, right. You have all sides of the political spectrum over in Israel, but there's certain things that also unify them as a people that. I used to really feel that way about the United States. And unfortunately, lately, I feel like that's starting to diverge in a way that is very, very unhealthy for a society. But yeah, I think as a people group, whether it's as a small community or even a larger nation, it's this idea that there's some agreement. There's some agreement about where we've come from, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But this idea, and I do think this is true of the United States, it has become really, really easy for us to look now. You see this all the time looking at the founders. And, they were, slave owners, or this or that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they were perfect. They weren't. They did some bad things.
They would tell you they were imperfect.
They would tell you that. But when you read the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, that opening, not preamble, but that opening statement within the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain and unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We look at that now, foregone conclusion. Back then, that was considered politically absurd, if not reckless. Forget whether or not it was true, right? They didn't even get into that. That was to say that out loud, that all of us are created equal by God, and that inherently these rights that are unalienable to us are not the random grant of government, but they come from God. Now, if you're going to look at that and say, well, that sounds nice, Nick, but we didn't live up to it. But like, yeah, they knew that. That's why in the preamble to the Constitution, it's in order to create a more perfect union. There is no perfection this side of heaven. And if you want to judge everybody according to some sort of utopia which has never existed, well, then yes, that's a very easy standard by which to give yourself some degree of, elevated sense of superiority. But the idea that a country was founded on that moral premise is incredible. And the idea that we have fought hard to try to live up to it, sometimes failing drastically, that is noteworthy. And that is something to be proud of. But if you're going to reduce everything down to, well, no, the lack of perfection is all the condemnation required to just discard everything that came before. That's problematic, because now what you're doing, when you take away any sense of shared past or shared meaning in that past, you are laying the groundwork for an identity crisis. And if there's anything this country is going through right now, both on an individual level and as a country, it's an identity crisis. And if we can't have some degree of shared meaning in at least the ideal that we were striving for, and the notion that on the whole, we have been a force for good, it's going to be really difficult to go forward as a unified country. Because how can you, when you have diametrically opposed views on not only who we were, but who we are and what we should be. So I hope that we can once again find that. And I hope we can do it without facing some sort of existential crisis.
How optimistic are you about our ability to do that? Notice I just posited that you're optimistic. The question is how optimistic?
Yeah.
But if that's unfair, that's fine.
No. Thomas Massey, who I respect a great deal and who is obviously going through difficulty right now with the loss of his wife, Rhonda, who's a wonderful woman. Thomas Massey tweeted out, I think a couple of weeks ago, he goes, I don't know if the country can be saved, but I'm here in case we can. And there's some people that will look at that and be like, well, that's inappropriate for a man of his position and prominence to say something. Well, he's being honest with you. And if there's one thing Thomas Massey is every single time, it's honest.
100% of the time.
100% of the time. And he's also courageous, I would argue. But here's what I would say. I made up my mind a while back that I love my country enough to whether or not it can be saved or can't be saved. I'm here for the fight. I am here for the fight. I'll go down with the ship. And the reason why I think it's so important for us to have that mentality is because I think it's the only one that actually can save us. If the only way you're willing to work to save it is if you can be guaranteed of success, then not only will you not win, you don't deserve to. Because nobody who built this country initially was guaranteed that. And all of the smart money was on them losing. And they did it anyways. So this is the hill I die on. And I not only want the people that I'm fighting alongside to know that that's my level of commitment. I want the people that want to destroy us to also know what's my level of commitment. If you want this country, you will have to go through me. And now my job is to make that as difficult as possible.
God bless you for your courage. What's next for you?
I think when Buckley said that politics is downstream from culture, it's become something of a cliche, but I think it's true. I think politics is incredibly important, and I'm very, very thankful for. I've dedicated a large part of my life to it, and I'm, going to be going right back into General Assembly next year to do the same thing. I've always been very grateful for Heritage for doing the same, but the thing that encourages me the most is the fight for the culture. And I don't think that means, if you read anything about Antonio Gramsci and his idea of the march through the institutions and the way they were going to finally take down the West and make it Marxist, was not going to be exclusively through politics. It was going to be through all the culturally shaping institutions, education, media, arts, and entertainment. I'm starting to see more and more people take that fight seriously and really go after it. And then ultimately it's the family. So what I will continue, I will fight the political fight as best I can with the understanding that that battle has to be fought. We can't accept giving ground there. But this is all about actually building up the culturally shaping institutions, beginning with the family. And I would say next into the whole idea of, that primary level of educational years. I think the more competition I see in that environment, the more optimistic I become about winning this. Like I said, if we're really serious and we do it right, we're one generation away from turning it around. One generation away. If you spend too much time focusing on the political and then all of your kids go off and vote the complete opposite of the way you did, something went wrong.
What have you achieved?
Something went wrong. And here's the best part. A lot of the political fights you have to fight, and they're not fun. They're not. I mean, I love spending time with my kids. I love spending time with my wife and my other co-hosts when we talk about cultural things and studying history and delving into those important questions and about ideas and history. I love when you when you hear like a talented entertainer or comedian just take the edge off the day with that humor, right? These are all the things that are fun. And if you want to be a happy warrior, then you got to do the happy things too. And the good news is that a lot of the things that are the most worth fighting for are also the ones that will provide you the most sense of meaning, purpose, and fun and gratification. So don't treat the whole thing like just a political slog. Fight in those other areas, and you will find that gives you not only the strength, but also the rest and the respite you sometimes need as well to get up and fight the other battles, which aren't so fun. So that's what I'll continue to do. I love the cultural fight, and I mean that in the most basic terms of fighting for the ideas which shape a family, a community, and ultimately a nation.
Being a cheerful warrior does not mean that everything we do is fun.
No.
It means that we have faith in our Lord above. Mm-hmm. Faith in this country, which is a way of saying a faith in fellow Americans, or at least most of them, and also a willingness to know that there will be rewards, maybe a few in this life, certainly in the next one, but along the way, in order to earn that, we got to charge some hills.
I think the greatest influencer of all time was Christ. And the model in that is one that does have a great deal of compassion, a great deal of genuine charity toward those in need, is one that is willing to sit down and have difficult intellectual discussions, and on occasion is turning over tables.
Got to remember that part.
On occasion is also turning over tables. And so I think it's important. I think that's a great model to emulate.
Nick, I'd spend a few hours talking with you. You've been generous with your time. You just got back from Israel. You're ready to get back home. And so thanks for stopping at Heritage before you did that. We look forward to having you back here as often as you would like over many years. And most of all, thanks for being a great man and a great patriot.
Oh, it's certainly my pleasure, and I can't thank you enough for all the work that you do at Heritage.
It's a privilege. I told you that it was a great day and year to be alive in the United States. Obviously, this conversation proves that. If you were feeling maybe a little discouraged about where things are going, don't be so presumptuous. Smile, be a cheerful warrior. We are in the process of taking back this country. Take care.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 10 million supporters of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, Tim Kennedy, and Joseph Fonsbakowski. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.